Welcome to the PodoTron Network.
You know, it doesn't matter what walk of life you come from, your race, religion, whatever. Chances are that the legacy of HBCUs and their graduates affect more than one aspect of your everyday life. HBCUbiquity.
Yeah. Welcome aboard.
Welcome to another episode of the new HBCUbiquity. I'm your host, Thomas Joyner Jr., and thank you for listening to today's episode. I'm coming to you from Dallas, Texas, where, as of today, our kids' schools are closed until April 3rd at the earliest. And in school districts across Texas, various forms of distance and online education are being utilized in the meanwhile. As for HBCUs in Texas, Paul Quinn, Houston-Tillotson, Texas Southern, and more have closed their campuses for the remainder of the semester. They've also moved to online instruction and have canceled their spring commencements. Elsewhere, Hampton and Clark have postponed their commencements for now. By now, you're probably aware of the stimulus bill currently being negotiated in Congress for financial relief for individuals, small businesses, unemployed workers, and more. But you may not be aware of a recent effort launched by Senators Cory Booker of New Jersey and Doug Jones of Alabama to provide HBCUs with emergency funding during the COVID-19 crisis. In this episode, I'll be joined by Senator Doug Jones as he breaks down the details and next steps for the emergency funding request, as well as some updates on how he and his colleagues on both sides of the aisle are supporting HBCUs and their students. Again, thank you for listening to this episode. Let's take a break from homeschooling, the news, Facebook. Let's talk HBCUs for a few minutes. Even during these trying times, our schools matter. So let's get started. Welcome to the new HBCUbiquity. Welcome back to the new HBCUbiquity. I'm joined now by the junior senator from the state of Alabama, Mr. Doug Jones. Good afternoon, Senator. How are you today, and how are things from where you're calling from?
Well, thanks for letting me join in with you today, and I am doing fine. I made it back home. I'm calling from my home in Birmingham, Alabama. And, things are going fine, although Alabama is seeing a spike in cases, a dramatic spike in the number of cases. We would probably see more if we had more testing available in the state. I saw our first deaths this week. So things are not good here in that sense, but, more and more people are practicing the social distancing, staying at home. So we're hoping we're going to do our part to blunt the curve. But so far, so good.
Well, that's good to hear, sir. And it's pretty much the same how it is on my end here in Dallas, Texas as well. But, Senator, what are some of the protocols that college campuses in Alabama have implemented regarding COVID-19 and the spring semester?
Yeah, well, everything is shutting down. I mean, candidly, everything is shutting down, even our K through 12. Most of the four-year colleges extended their spring breaks, but now they've essentially canceled classes for the end of the year and are going to online classes. Yeah, which is fine. And our K through 12 is doing the same thing, except for if you happen to live in some of these underserved areas that don't have internet that we've been trying to get to. That's a problem. But they are moving all commencement exercises, all sporting events, spring sporting events. Everything in Alabama is just like the rest of the country. We're essentially shut down until we see how this is going through end of April, 1st of May, probably even to the end of May.
Wow, and I understand that. And Senator, you, along with Senator Cory Booker, along with United Negro College Fund and Thurgood Marshall College Fund, you recently requested $1.5 billion in emergency funding for HBCUs.
Right.
So I guess my questions are, how would that work? How soon will the schools be able to access those funds? And how would you see those emergency funds being utilized?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, we requested $1.5 billion as it ended up in the bill that was passed unanimously by the Senate this week. It ended up with 1.05. So just over $1 billion did get approved in this package. That bill is currently being debated on the floor of the House of Representatives. I believe it'll pass. There's been a few hiccups. A couple of the colleagues over there on the floor of the House are acting like fools and holding this thing up. I mean, acting like complete idiots, giving folks a bad name, but it will pass. It is going to pass. Speaker Pelosi, Minority Leader McCarthy are They are dead set on getting this passed today to get it to the president's desk to sign. Hopefully that money can start being accessed in the next couple of weeks. It can be used for any number of things. I think primarily it's for capital projects. It's a time where they can go ahead and do those things around their campuses. You know that they need this money desperately for their infrastructure and their campuses. So I think they'll be able to use that and get that in place while students are out, and they can still get the economy keeping going in their areas, with some work being done, keeping that social distancing, but at least have some things done. That's how it'll be. And hopefully it'll get this money is going to get to them real soon.
It sounds as though, if hearing coming from you, that there will not be too many restrictions on these funds.
I don't think there will be a lot of restrictions on the funds, not out of the ordinary restrictions. I think they want to get it moving. The goal of this is twofold. Number one is to get the money to these schools that are going to need it. It gives them an opportunity to bolster things. They're going to get hit harder than the big schools that have these big endowments that can reach into these endowments. So, and the second thing is it will be a way to help these communities in a way to help continue their economy going in those areas. And that's a really important part of this. It's not just for the schools, but it's for the communities that those schools serve.
And I guess you would, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Senator, because as you, of course, are aware, in Alabama, the 13 HBCUs, majority of them are in smaller towns and smaller communities. Right. Therefore, they're communities that are dependent upon the business of the local college university to stay afloat, basically.
That's absolutely right. And so this is a way to get money. This bill gets money directly in the hands of individuals. It gets money for small businesses. But this is a way to help prop that up, to get even more money coming into those communities so that they can work on these projects. So it's overall, we're trying to do as much as we can. Congress is doing as much as we can to prop up the United States economy and individual community economy so that people can stay in and that they can stay in with their families and try to stop the spread of this virus. As soon as we can blunt this curve and get out of the spread of this virus, the sooner we can all get back to work and get back to school and getting back to normal.
Yeah. Now, Senator, you recently helped with the passage of the Future Act as it reestablished funding for HBCUs and simplified the FAFSA process. So how much funding will HBCUs be receiving from that bill, and what other benefits can they and or their students expect?
Well, here's the thing about the Futures Act. Traditionally, over the years, HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions receive about $255 billion a year from the federal government. But that's been on a program that was cyclical. It would turn over. You had to reauthorize the program every so often. That was the problem we were running into last fall because the programs expired on September 30th. Now, fortunately, most of these schools had their money in place for the upcoming year, so it didn't really affect them. But we knew by January, if they had not got that, what they call the permanent funding back in place, then they were going to have to start figuring out what to do without that extra money. So we were able to get the Future Act passed, which really makes it permanent. It will be permanent funding now that will not expire to the tune of $255 billion. I forget, it's about 85 or 90 billion of that goes actually to HBCUs in particular. That's going to give these people some permanent, a permanent basis of which they can plan. They don't have to worry about it being subject to political whims, in different administrations and whatever. So that's going to give them that base that's going to be there every year that they can plan on from year to year. So it was a really important thing. I was so proud of being able to be part of that, to get that across the finish line.
This is Thomas Joyner Jr., and you're listening to the new HBCUbiquity. And as that helps institutions, the other part of that helps the students is how you simplify the FAFSA process. Can you expand upon that a little bit?
Absolutely. That is one of the things that we're continuing to work on, by the way. The FAFSA program, that free application for federal student aid, known as FAFSA, is one of the most complicated, difficult things for people to maneuver. I mean, you've got to have 4 PhDs to even get through it. And even then, it's difficult because you got to pull records from different places. So the first step that we did as part of the Futures Act was to cut out about 25 questions and basically allow other departments within the United States government that have this information already, like the Internal Revenue Service. You can access that with a click. Give them permission. They can incorporate that into the process. That was a big deal. the bill that Senator Alexander and I have that is still pending, that if we can get back and really get to doing the kind of work that we want to do, and we're going to simplify that whole form down to about 20, 25 questions. Alabama in particular, Tom, just our state alone in 2018, only about half of the seniors filled it out, and we left about $57 million of grant money, not loans,
wow,
but grant money got left on the table because they did not fill out this application. So that's another way we can get more students into the HBCUs and minority serving institutions, give the students every aid that we can to make sure if they want to go to college, then a stupid government form won't stand in their way.
Now, Senator Jones, will the funding from that bill have any bearing on how HBCUs will be assisted through the emergency funding request?
No, it should not at all. It should be separate. Now, I've got to be honest about this.
Okay.
Every year we've been, I've been really successful the last 2 years getting increased funding in their discretionary pot of money. The Futures Act dealt with that permanent funding, but there's other funds that go out every year that are more discretionary funding with the government that's done every appropriation cycle.
Right.
In the last 2 years since I've been in the Senate, we've been able to get almost a 30% increase for HBCUs in that discretionary funding, which had been flat for about 6 or 7 years prior to me getting in the Senate. I wouldn't be surprised if we were only able to maintain level funding this year. It's going to be difficult, I think, for anybody to get an increase in funds given a $2 trillion stimulus package that we just passed. And quite frankly, I'm not sure that $2 trillion is going to be enough. We may have to do another one. That's over and above our $1.3 trillion budget that we've got here. So the federal government, you can say what you want to about us, but we're stepping up, and it's not a perfect bill. It's not everything I want. But between the appropriations and a process that we've got ongoing for next year's appropriations and this stimulus package, government is really stepping up to try to put a floor on this economy.
That's great to hear, Senator. And I really appreciate your time and your candor about all of this. In closing, Senator, can you share with our audience your thoughts on the importance and significance of historically Black colleges and universities, not just to Alabama, but to the country in general?
Oh, they're incredible. The ones we've got here in Alabama are just amazing. They're the real fabric of their communities, and they provide so many opportunities for folks who might not otherwise get those opportunities. I mean, so many doctors and lawyers and engineers and professionals come out of those HBCUs that started their education maybe on a Pell Grant. Or something, that went to that HBCU, got an incredible education, went on and got additional degrees. And significantly, as we were talking about a minute ago, it's two things. It's an economic driver for the state and those local communities. But as much as anything, too, it is a source of pride. I've not been to, I go to a lot of college football games, and everybody gets all fired up about those games. And that Magic City Classic in Birmingham is an amazing thing to go to.
Yes, it is.
But beyond the sporting events, which is what you see, there is such a deeply held feeling for these HBCUs among those that have graduated from there and the families of those. It's given minority populations the ability to build generational wealth that they might not otherwise get. So it's just so important that we continue to do all we can from a federal level and the state level to support them, but also to encourage kids to look at these HBCUs, to go and attend, because it's an incredible, incredible experience.
Well, Senator Jones, thanks for doing your part to make it easier to attend these HBCUs. And by all means, please, number one, keep up the good work. Number two, stay healthy. And number three, stay virus free. We really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for having me. And we'll do it anytime. And please pass along my regards to your dad.
Will do, Senator. Thank you. Welcome back to the new HBCUbiquity. First off, I want to thank Senator Doug Jones for being available on such short notice to come on and talk about ideas and solutions for HBCUs during these trying times. Like I said earlier, HBCUs matter. While our attention is trained on public health and the economy, we can't take our eyes off of education and the next generation of our workforce. Maintain in the present, but stay mindful of the future. Secondly, thank you again for listening to this podcast. While you're here, check out some of the other great African American podcast content on the PodoTron Network. After all, if you got time, check out Superpower Her with Dia Direct or My Mama Said with Tamara Johnson. In fact, there are more than a dozen great shows to check out at the PodoTron Network, PodoTron.com. In the meantime, we'll keep discussing HBCUs. Check back here on next week for another new episode. I'm Thomas Joyner Jr., and thank you for listening to the new HBCUbiquity.
Sign up and be a part of the team. Be a PodoTroner at PodoTron.com. Thank you for listening to PodoTron.